Good morning and welcome to Tariffs Today, the rebranded program. We no longer are the morning meeting. We're Tariffs Today. Now we're still the morning meeting. Thank you for joining. We'll talk a lot about tariffs. We'll talk about some other stuff too. Grateful for you to join, Dan and Sean and myself, to romp through the day's day book, what's coming up, and talk about it. And then, of course, your questions or comments if you're here on the two-way platform. Please raise your hand. If you're watching elsewhere, no smack in the chat. Peace, love, and understanding. Thank you for joining. Gentlemen, did you stay up and watch the end of the basketball game?
Yes.
Yes. Dan?
I was happy that I stayed up to watch the start of the game. That's big for me.
Okay. Either of you have a view about the White Lotus finale from 2 nights ago?
I've never seen a single White Lotus, and I'm pretty happy about that.
I canceled my Max subscription, so I'm trying to find if you have a password that I can use, I'll watch it, but
Okay.
Get
This
off my
passes
lawn,
this
right?
passes for small talk. I watched it and I've got nothing to say about it except the body count was excessive for me. All right, today the president is commemorating a tree planting in a closed press event at 10:30. The White House put out an extremely long press release about it. And I don't quite get it, but it's something to do with Andrew Jackson. 3 o'clock, he
I think it has to
participates.
do with
Yeah.
getting ahead of the he's a horrible cutting down a tree kind of guy, but that's my take because
I guess, but then they better open it up to the press because we won't know he's not horrible if it's closed press. 3 o'clock, he participates in a open press Unleashing American Energy Executive Order signing event. Probably take questions about that. And then he goes over in the evening to the Building Museum where he makes remarks to a fundraiser for the NRCC, which appears to be open press. So that could be a very long stem winder occurring in theory during the back half of two-way tonight. So we may just turn over the show to his speech. And then the Caroline Levitt's briefing at 1 o'clock today. I'm not in the new media seat today, for those of you who are wondering. Don't know what the vice president's doing. Lots going on the Hill. The head of the USTR, the trade representative, Mr. Jamison Greer, is before Senate Finance at 10 a.m. He's testifying at the House later this week. House leadership, a Republican leadership press conference also at 10 a.m. Democratic leadership press conference around 1 p.m. Tom Emmer is hosting the head of NAM, National Association of Manufacturers, Jay Timmons, and the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, at some point today. I've seen conflicting times for a roundtable on the economy. The Senate's working on a bunch of nominations, including the ongoing Elbridge Colby saga for his Pentagon job, George Glass to be ambassador to Japan, and Mike Huckabee to be ambassador to Israel. All right. There's so much to say about tariffs. The expectation based on futures and Asia and Europe is that the markets may not be down as much or at all today in the U.S. We'll check in at 9:30 to see what happens on the opening bell. But let's just level set before we run through some elements. Sean, where do you think we are in terms of negotiation, not negotiation, and world reaction to what's going on?
so from what I understand, the Bessent worldview is taking hold, which is that we've said that these were going to be reciprocal. We need to have a negotiation so we can show that them coming down to give market certainty. And so I believe that that's where things are going to head today. More discussion, more attempts to do kind of what I said last Friday, but I think there was clearly some uh, differences of opinion among staff as to what the goals were. And I think that Bessent has sort of won the day on that this needs to be about market access and increasing manufacturing here at home and maybe less about deficit reduction. Not that we can't take some money in, but that's not really the dual message that's working. And so I think that by the end of today, we might have some more progress on talking about deals, getting some things done. But I think that the market's also sort of getting that signal as well.
Dan.
I think they are looking for the exit ramp. They found it with the word negotiation. I think you'll see more announcements of negotiations just to create the perception of momentum. I think the market will be up today. Right now, futures are up almost 1,000 this morning. I think the CEOs, whether it's Wall Street, tech, the business community, realized the best way to get Trump to move was to let him save face, right? Show like quote strength because you're negotiating. So Trump loves to say everyone's begging me, everyone's, begging for money, begging for my endorsement. So he gets to look tough, but he's exiting. He knows this was stupid. He started telling allies yesterday, apparently, that we're going to end this soon. I think the real interesting question is going to be the Bannons of the world that really want to try to create, the manufacturing hub again. What they're looking at doing to exit is the complete opposite. It's opening market access for our goods and services overseas.
The one thing I would say is just, I don't, and I've said this, so I just want to be clear on this, that like, if Trump was left to his own devices, this was about market access. This was about fairness, reciprocity. I think he got talked into the deficit piece. That wasn't where his head was at. And so with all due respect, I don't think this isn't about off ramps. Like, oh my God, he saw this. This is where his head always was. And it's been for decades. So his view was if you take them down, then we're good. Not just the tariff, but the non-tariff barriers. So I think that just to be clear, this isn't like he's pivoting. Like this is where his head always was.
But the only problem with that, Sean, is if you pull the tariffs down because someone else pulled theirs down, you're not reshoring anything. Because then why should I bring it back if there's no tariff to move things back and forth? Right. So you're that goal, which I think to your point, he dreams of the 1950s. We're making Model Ts in Detroit and steel's made here and everything's made here. He's pulling the plug on that.
No. Actually, because here's where I'll differ. I do think that you're not going to bring everything back. But when given the choice, I think CEOs would rather do business in the United States under our laws than in a bunch of places where you're paying off corrupt politicians much more openly than you do here. And so I think that you may not bring back every piece of manufacturing because of environmental and labor law. But I do think that there's going to be a lot that comes back. And there's also a degree of certainty that they know that the U.S., like if I'm here, I'm not going to get screwed again.
So the weirdest piece of journalism of the news cycle was in a Politico story that led with an important news that Scott Bessent had gone down to Mar-a-Lago this weekend and lobbied the president, as Sean said, to move towards negotiation. Buried in that story is a paragraph that says Trump himself is calling people saying, don't worry, this thing's going to end soon, and we're gonna make deals. So it seems that's the direction we're headed. Here is the aforementioned Treasury Secretary. This would be 104 back-to-back 105 on Squawk Box this morning. Fewer surrogates out than yesterday, but the Treasury Secretary, who's moved kind of front and center in guiding the policy now to some extent, was on Squawk Box. Here he is.
It's all President Trump's decision, and he had a view on after Liberation Day that we should go into quiet mode and let our partners think about the kind of the shock and awe that he presented. And over those following few days from April 2nd, we had I think we're up to 70 countries contact the White House for how to come and negotiate. So, I would say that the negotiations are the result of the massive inflow of inbound calls to come and negotiate. Had nothing to do with the market.
The president said yesterday with Netanyahu, quote, that these tariffs can be permanent tariffs and there can also be negotiations. Yeah. We also had Peter Navarro, as Becky mentioned, and you just talked about, saying that the whole goal of this is to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And then there's been the discussion of trying to raise revenue as a function of the tariffs. All of those different ideas, to some degree, oddly enough, are at odds with each other. I'm trying to understand from your perspective whether these really are negotiations, they're not negotiations, what success at the end of the day actually looks like.
If we put up a tariff wall, the ultimate goal would be to bring jobs back to the U.S., but in the meantime, we will be collecting substantial tariffs. As I've said, I believe on this show that if we're successful, tariffs would be a melting ice cube in a way, because you're taking in the revenues as the manufacturing facilities are built in the U.S., and there should be some level of symmetry between the taxes we begin taking in with the new industry from the payroll taxes as the tariffs decline.
All right, a little inside baseball history because it's important now. Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnik vied to be Treasury Secretary. Lutnik lost out and became Commerce Secretary, but he negotiated to be named Tariff Czar as Commerce Secretary, which is not normal, but he got that. What we're seeing in the last day, and that appearance signifies it, is the Bessent point of view. This is not about revenue. This is about leverage for greater deals, is ascendant and appears to be where this is headed, which will calm markets. Bessent's fellow millionaires and billionaires would much prefer to see him out there. And the Wall Street Journal has a savage hit job on Howard Lutnik, saying the president thinks he's around too much, nobody likes him, everybody thinks he needs to stay off TV, etc. So, Sean, what is going on here between Lutnik, Trump, and Bessent?
I think you described it. There's a sense that I mean, look, when I was at the U.S. Trade Rep's office, we would constantly do battle with not so much USDA, because Mike Johans is a great guy, but like Commerce, and then the Secretary, and then Treasury, because, you know, Paulson was a very, very esteemed businessman. He had a lot of connections, so people would call him. That's life, right? They kind of go, great, I know Hank Paulson, I'm going to call him. And there was always some tension because we wanted to, you know, we handled trade, we handled a bunch of that stuff, but people wanted to call Hank Paulson because he was who he is. And I think part of this, if you're Lutnik and Bessent, is stay in your lane, right? This is what I do. This is what you do. And I think that there's a little bit of tension. Both of them are non-Washington guys. They're not politicians. And I think that they, you know, both have very strong styles and sense of personality. And you're going to see this. And I think it's played out. You can see, you know, not just that Wall Street Journal story, right? That was Dawsey. Last week was the New York Post and Politico. Like, there is clearly I'm going to show you. You want to see what happens when you go into my sandbox? I kick you out real quick. And I think that this is going to be an interesting thing. You know, when you're new, I don't think you fully appreciate that it's not just the secretary and the principal that you're dealing with, but all the people underneath them come ready to bear. And I will say this, I don't know Howard's team as well. And again, I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying, like, when you look at Scott's team over at Treasury, without getting into names, because I don't want to, you know, they're not there, but they are some experienced fighters. And
they're ninjas with nunchucks is what they are.
No, they're the nunchucks that have the cushions on them, so that
they've got razor blades on both sides.
It doesn't leave a bruise. Yeah. You know, they know how to fight like that. And I'm just saying, like, if you're going to play this game, you better be ready to play.
The only thing I'd say before Dan gets in is, you're right. I think everything he said is right, except remember, as I said, Trump gave Lutnik that lane. He said, you're in charge of tariffs. So he could say he's playing in his lane. He's just not playing in his lane in a way that other people seem to appreciate.
But also I think that there is, look, we've said this. I haven't done a single interview in 96 hours where somebody hasn't said to me, what's the message? Is it, and I'm talking even from MAGA world, right? People are saying, hey, I want to be with the president, but are we fighting for reducing the deficit, or are we fighting for market access? And if the problem isn't, you know, necessarily Trump, it's you've got different people going out there and saying, this is the thing. I will say, to your point about reduced surrogates, I would pay attention to who goes out. There's going to be a lot more discipline, from what I believe, as far as who does what interviews.
Yeah. Dan.
I think Bessent's like Michael and Lutnik's like Sonny in The Godfather. I mean, Lutnik's just, you know, he gets very hot quickly. He's full of bravado and speaking all over the place. And Bessent is just the quiet, measured person. I mean, half of what he said in that CNBC interview was absurd, but, you know, it's calming. It sounds somewhat logical. And I think, you know, the fact that he went to Florida, it didn't get out initially. He is trying to move Trump in private. Smart, right? I mean, that's how you try to deal with them. So, and I'll also just add, by the way, shout out to the Democratic Party, who has actually, for the second week in a row, played an issue fairly well. They have not inserted themselves with like Trump derangement syndrome, that you don't have the squad and others screaming. You got people like Andy Beshear, Whitmer, Polis saying, this is how it impacts our state. Here are the companies that benefit from trade. Here is how this hurts us. It's getting into a few stories, but they're letting Republicans circular firing squad and hang themselves. Shout out to the party.
You know, and
It's
it's not just the stories. I mean, we talked a little bit about this from Bill Ackman yesterday. He obviously walked it back a little last night in terms of the personal nature, but the people are pointing their finger at Howard, right? Because if you're not that, but more because you're the guy that's championing this. And so when they're calling President Trump, they're saying, I'm hearing your guys say the following. And I think the way that Scott's playing this is beautiful because when you want to talk to Trump and have a conversation with him about a policy that's divergent from where he is, you don't do it in public. You don't do it with 18 people in the room. You say, can I meet with you privately? I have an idea. I know what your goal is. I think blah, blah, blah. But like, and I think that Scott has handled this really smart because he's not the guy that's out there owning it.
right. So Trump 101, you got to be in the room. Part of why Bessent got the job he wanted and others, including Lutnik, didn't, is because he went to Mar-a-Lago and camped out during the transition. Howard was there also because he was running the transition. But other people who didn't get big jobs they wanted didn't invest the time. Friday night, or Thursday rather, when Trump flew down to Florida, you saw Lutnik standing on Air Force One in the shot as Trump talked to the pool. And Bessent, unbeknownst until it was reported this morning, flew down separately and, as Sean said, met with the president and had his influence. Millionaires and billionaires, for the most part, would prefer that Bessent drive this policy rather than Lutnik. Dan has correctly pointed out that there's an incredible story, much of it playing out on Twitter, taking place in a war within the party, including a lot of finance and tech people who supported Donald Trump for president, but are not happy with this policy. Sean, who is David Marcus?
Oh, I know this, but
All right, he's a MAGA conservative, a writer. I thought you knew him. Sorry.
I was up late.
Didn't mean to put you on line. All right, so David Marcus has two tweets that speak to this issue of tensions within the party. Let's do 106 first, please. So here's someone who is important as symbolically. Ken Langone, who's a billionaire, longtime Republican donor, has not been super Trumpy. He was for Chris Christie, for instance, in 16, but has been a supporter of the president. And he tells the New York Post that the policy is bullshit. David Marcus tweets this: "It's not your party anymore, Ken. It belongs to the working class now." Okay, that's part of why some people are supporting the tariff policy, even though they don't particularly understand what's happening. They don't like the mixed messaging because their view is we shouldn't be the party of millionaires and billionaires. And if millionaires and billionaires are squeaking, which they are, it's good for the party and it's good policy. Here's the second David Marcus tweet, 108. I think this is super interesting. 2 weeks ago, Democrats were arguing that Trump was only interested in helping his billionaire buddies. Now they've lost millions and are begging Trump to change course. How do we square that circle? There's a lot of truth in this, right? Trump's policies on tariffs are not popular with millionaires and billionaires. So Dan, in talking about your party's framing on Trump and this issue, what is the significance to you of those two David Marcus tweets?
Well, Trump's exiting from these tariffs. I mean, look, they're not humiliating. Bessent knew, as John said, and you said, Mark, go quietly. Trump is not going to come out and wave the flag. He's going to project strength and it's going to be a machismo exit, but he's exiting. So I think it worked. And these are the same people he hangs out with at Mar-a-Lago. These are the same people who, buy his condos. So it is a working class party. Trump is sensitive to the working class. They are part of his base, but Trump is not sticking it to him here. Yeah. Now we're going to get to something else where he may stick it to some of them, but
Sean, Trump loves millionaires and billionaires, and he loves their approval. Yeah. So how do you think he's dealing with the fact that most of them are very angry about what he's doing?
Well, I mean, you said I think he's telling them, "Hey, I'm going to get deals." I will say that you saw Taiwan come out this morning talking about lowering stuff. I talked to Netanyahu last night. He's like, I'm dropping our tariff and our non-tariff barriers. Trump's going to, we might be a week late, but I think he's going to put some points on the board and say, see, I'm getting these guys. They've now talked about 70 countries that are wanting to call. That's great, but I think they're going to want to show real quick, this is what we've got, this is what we've got, this is what we've got. Yeah. And Trump's going to move into announcing deal mode quick.
I hope these negotiators on the U.S. side understand how to appraise the dropping of non-tariff barriers. It's easy to say our formal tariffs are going to zero, but non-tariff barriers are incredibly insidious. And I don't know how you make those deals and be confident that they stick. All right. China is a special case. And the rhetoric around China with the new set of tariffs scheduled to go into effect the next day is complicated because I was told they weren't going to pick this fight in the spring. I was told they were going to pick this fight in the fall, but they've picked it now. Here, 103. This is a typical tweet from a typical member of the financial world, very smart person, making the case that the United States is not going to win this trade war with China because of the asymmetries between the two countries. So he says, who has a higher pain tolerance? Person A, by which he means Donald Trump, governs a democratic society addicted to consumption with zero tolerance for inflation, is going to witness immediate shortages and price increases, has zero capacity to reroute the lost imports into domestic production in the short term, is in an economic war with every country on earth simultaneously. Not true if they start to settle, but still will be at war with others. Or person B, which is Chairman Xi, governs an autocratic dictatorship with zero dissent allowed, oversees a society that inherently believes in self-sacrifice for the greater good of the motherland, trying to ramp up domestic consumption and could easily stimulate consumers domestically to buy otherwise would be what would otherwise be exports. And finally, is an economic war with only one country on earth. Sean, what do you think of that case that this is not going to be a winnable war for President Trump under these circumstances?
I think if you lay it out that way, it makes a ton of sense. I don't think that he cares. I mean, I think Trump is willing to go to the mattresses to keep Dan's Godfather's analogies kind of alive. He wants his view is, and again, I think we can all agree, China is cheating the hell out of us when it comes to how they deal with us, whether it's IP, tech transfers, etc. But so he's going to kind of want to ratchet it up, which he did, another 50%. I don't know that analysis of China is also spot on. I mean, their economy is not what it once was. They're relying now on 5% potential growth. I don't know how much they want to risk. I will say if I have a crystal ball, you're going to see a summit in China announced fairly soon. Trump to visit China, them to have some kind of leader summit, and maybe a pause until that occurs.
Are you breaking news there or speculating?
That is me just speculating, just random speculation.
Okay. Dan, I think the asymmetries with China do not bode well for this fight, but the president has cards to play. So if you're gonna fight them, I think he's in a better position than any president has been since Bush 41 to take on China. What do you think?
Yeah, and just two things I'm seeing in the chat that Governor Sununu is not going to run in New Hampshire, which is a big thing for Democrats' prospects for keeping that Senate seat. I think they're picking it now because they are going to off-ramp all these other fights and they need to show strength. And the one place there's kind of unity within the country is picking a fight with China. I do think that that tweet rings true, that not only that, but she has a domestic audience. They do not want to be seen as weak. I mean, the one thing in Chinese culture is to be strong. And they're looking around Asia and they do not want to, fold easily. So if we get into a kind of, true trade war with China, they have a lot of levers to pull. They own a portion of our debt. There's a lot of, products that are still made there. People are trying to move it out. But by the way, look, they're not trying to move it out to the United States. For those who didn't see Apple yesterday, their big announcement, they are moving production to India, not the United States, for a lot of the iPhones. So, I mean, the irony is we will want to try to, it goes back to the old TPP back when he ran in 2016. So I'll be really curious to see, but you're not going to get Democrats pushing back to say, go easy on China. He'll have a lot of rope within the country for this.
Yeah. Sean, let's do a few more topics, then we'll get folks in. So again, if you want to be in the conversation, please raise your hand. Sean, are you still where you and I were yesterday? And I think Dan was, which is they don't have all the votes in hand, but by the end of the week, they will pass reconciliation in the House.
Yeah. I mean, look, I know you don't bet. I wouldn't bet on this, but if I had some of Dan's money, I would say that it passes because Trump understands that this is critical. He saw his truth last night. He'll make the calls. I think the odds are that he rolls them. It's not going to be pretty. There might be
Yeah.
some concessions, but I think this is not going to be as easy as a quick phone call. Like there's going to be a deal.
Yeah.
We'll agree to future spending cuts or something. But again, if I'm betting with Dan's money, it happens. It's not pretty.
Yep. I totally
Focus
agree.
light.
Dan, agree?
Yes, this is going to go through. They're just kicking the can down the road.
What I find hilarious is, and again, we've talked about this before, but the leaderships and the White House says to members, just vote for us on this one. It's not the last step. Just let us get to the next phase. You'll have plenty of time to vote again. And then, of course, when they get to those phases, they say, well, we've already come this far. Now you have to vote for it. And I just can't believe the members fall for it, but they're going to, I think. All right. Tim Hogan, formerly of the morning meeting, Washington Post reporting that he's running a newly constituted Democratic war room to deal with getting the message out, both through traditional means, but also through some of the more modern digital means that the Republicans in 2024 seem superior at. Dan, what are some pieces of advice you would give to Tim about what's important to put in that war room or what his priorities should be?
Well, far be it for me to give Tim Hogan advice. He tends to give me advice. Look, I think a couple of things. One, I would stick to the real lives of real people. It's always best when you are fighting an issue with examples of how something is impacting, whether it's positively or negatively, real people. I would pick your spokespeople strategically. I mean, not that you can tell members to not go on TV, but again, like Andy Beshear is a great spokesperson on trade. You know, he's a governor. He's from a state that isn't traditionally blue, talking about, you know, bourbon and car manufacturing and everything. And then I think, look, part of this is if you're going to go to the new media, you got to let your hair down. You can't just go on and read talking points. You've got to engage with people and show people who you are. So I think it's a great sign that somebody like Tim Hogan is willing to do this. It's a really good sign.
Sean, suspend your normal rules and help Tim.
Yeah, well, I don't know that Tim needs that much help. I'll agree with Dan on that. But I would say one of the things, like, you know, I've always felt like when I was at the RNC, one of the things the parties tend to do well is look at the other side and see what did they do well? How can we build on it? We did that very successfully, not so much on the party, but after Obama in 2008, as we moved into 12, and then subsequently going forward. And I would look at this White House. I've said it before. I think what they've done to bring in influencers in a way that's very different is something that I would get to, right? So stop trying to worry. There's only this much bandwidth, maybe this much, that goes to MSNBC. Look at those influencers. Look at the Substack folks. Look at the people who are, you know, kind of beyond Pod Save America. Who are the people that have 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 subscribers? Get them engaged, get them fired up. Because the bottom line is, for all of these people, you know, and we all have shows or do stuff, like part of it is content, and you want guests, you want this, so they can be that engine that helps these guys get the word out, feel part of a team, feel bought in. And so if I were Tim, I would concentrate 80% of my time on the people who have those emerging audiences, because they're going to continue to grow as we head towards the 2028 midterms. And then obviously, the 2026 midterms and the 2020 election. You're investing. This is a smart stock to buy, right? So investing in dying industries like, you know, linear cable is not a good bet. Investing in these individuals who are going to grow their audience, who are going to grow in influence, is a smart move. And that's where I would tell them to go.
There are last topic, and then again, we're going to get to your community questions. We'll start on New Hampshire because, as Dan said, Governor Sununu is not going to run. We'll talk about that briefly with someone here. But each of you, let's all do one example of a story. Now that the media is moving a little bit off of tariffs, although it will still be obviously a huge story today and the market's about to open. What's one story that you think is not getting sufficient coverage in the last 6 days because of tariffs, Dan?
I'll give two, if I may. One is the Republicans are looking to establish $1 million tax threshold, a new high end, and raise it to 40%. I mean, that sounds like Bernie Sanders. And that, I think, would undercut the Democratic Party. It would help Trump with his messaging going into reconciliation and just the future of the Republican Party. Because once you establish that threshold, it will move up and down with time. The other is just the tax cut fantasy of waving away $4 trillion in extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts. they may get away with it, and that is astonishing.
Sean.
I had two because usually mine gets stolen. So I think that the proxy voting in the House is sort of a very interesting to me internal inside the Beltway discussion, which I've been fascinated to watch. Anna Paulina Luna, 8 or 9 of these other Republican members adjoining Dems to sign a discharge petition and shutting down the House floor activity last week with Mike Johnson. There's a potential deal today. But I found it just sort of the internal fighting at a very interesting time, not helpful. And then I think some of the stuff that Robert F. Kennedy's doing at HHS is awesome and fantastic. And I don't think, and I'm actually in a weird way glad that it's not getting the attention, only because I think the way that they view so much of his attempt to bring transparency and accountability, there's such massive conflicts with the media that it's almost good that they're not there to cover some of it.
I like all of yours. I'll tell you what mine is. This is Supreme Court. So we'll go watch the open here with no audio. We can put that up. Eventually, the Supreme Court's going to rule on a bunch of stuff. They've already started to dip their toe in on some of these issues, but mostly with emergency appeals from the district court to Court of Appeals. I think a lot of people, Sean raised this early on, that the tariffs may be struck down because they say the president's operating under authority he doesn't have. But the willingness of the Chief Justice and Amy Coney Barrett to vote against the president is going to be massive on a range of issues. And we're seeing so far that both of them are willing to vote against her. A lot of conservatives think Donald Trump put 3 David Souters on the court, not people who are going to vote consistently with him. And I think it's just a huge story. We don't see it in full form yet, but we're starting to see indications. All right.
I do think, by the way, you're right on like the Amy Coney Barrett thing to me is sort of going to come into focus more. I will say this, in talking to people about this, there's a very interesting, she's not like she just really believes in sort of separation of powers. And that's it's not an anti-Trump thing. I get it. Most Trump people believe you're either with him or against him, but she's not like, I don't believe that this president, she sort of is very clear in her judicial thinking, which so again, is not making people happy, but I'm just.
That's one way to evaluate judges and justices. But the reality is, particularly after Bush versus Gore, I think we could all be under no illusion that when the chips are down, the partisans expect the justices to be result oriented. So these cases, you're right. You could rule on them on the merits if you wanted to. But MAGA expects the justices on their team to be result oriented, and she's not result oriented. Sometimes she is, but she's not always, and they're going to be, I think, really disappointed, and same obviously with the Chief Justice, and maybe sometimes Brett too. Brett sometimes I think is going to cross them as well, and that means you're going to see a lot of cases potentially going against the president in stuff that's going to be epic in terms of the MAGA agenda. All right,
Mark, can I say with this movement in the Dow this morning, I do wonder if this strengthens the hand of Bessent to say, and those around Trump who's saying, get out of these.
Oh, yeah.
The market just took off. Let's cut these deals. Yeah.
100%.
And I wonder if it impacted Sununu, by the way, deciding not to run.
So let's talk about that.
All right, can I make one last? I just want to say this for the record. If Donald Trump gets 50 deals and the market rebounds, then everyone who wet their pants the last 96 hours is, again, this comes back to he may have just played everybody huge. And I just want to
100%. Assuming he gets some manufacturing here. I agree with you, Sean, but he's got to get some manufacturing here. So one of Halperin's rules of campaigns is don't analyze whether someone's going to run based on can they raise the money or can they win the primary or can they win the general. You got to start with, do they actually want the job? This is why I don't think Kamala Harris is going to run for governor, and why Chris Sununu rather announced this morning on Jack Heath's radio show that he's not running for Senate because I don't think he wants to be a senator. So sure, Republicans would love him to run because he's probably the only Republican who can win that seat, but he doesn't want to be a senator. So no surprise to me, he's not running. Are either of our New Hampshire folks here and available? We've got 2 of them, New Hampshire's finest reporters and analysts on here, but I don't see them with their hands up. Guys, raise your hands if you want to get in. Sean, what do you think of Sununu not running?
I mean, I don't think it surprises me. To your point, he didn't want to be a senator. I think he doesn't want to have to. I think Chris Sununu knows exactly who he is, and he doesn't want to have to capitulate on issues for fear of, some sort of retaliation from the base. He wants to be who he is. I don't know that he wouldn't run in the future. I just don't know that he wants to run, knowing that there'll be immediate conflict with Donald Trump on a whole host of issues.
I was just about to say, then why did he flirt the other week with? I'm thinking about it.
I will say this, Dan. I'm agreeing with you. Like the idea that you go to the Oval Office and have this break bread moment. I actually thought I had questioned myself because of that, and I thought, wow, maybe this is a thing. He wants to. Who knows? But I thought that may actually, don't be surprised if you see Trump now turn on him a little and say, I can't believe you wasted my time.
Yeah, 100%. Mr. Bartlett, New Hampshire, keen New Hampshire observer. Welcome in. What do you think of this new announcement?
Hey, yeah, I'm here in New Hampshire. I was with Congressman Chris Pappas at his announcement last Thursday. I saw Representative Maggie Goodlander on Friday. And full disclosure, I am a Republican and, big fan of Chris Sununu and even consider him a bit of a bud. Not surprised that he is not running. As you stated, his brother was a senator. He's always had, a bad taste in his mouth with the U.S. Senate, as do most governors. Been out of the game a little bit, maybe wants back in, looking at polling that said he could potentially win, but it's a midterm. In New Hampshire, the party in power historically does not do well. That's a challenge. And then two massive factors, I would say. It seems as if he's always been, I don't want to, be something, a governor or a senator. I want to do something. And the notion of reforming government, including entitlement reform, was attractive to him. He actually appreciated some of the DOGE efforts, and I think that got him excited. Conversely, I'm not sure that is going over too well with the public here in New Hampshire. And then obviously,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, obviously, with the tariffs, he is, something of a old conservative free trader, not a protectionist. So imagine going out and trying to sell these ideas, rowing against the tide of a midterm. He may run in the future. Who knows what happens? Who knows what things look like? But all of that combined with, a young family that doesn't, is sick of him running, distaste of the Senate and just the political atmosphere, not surprising.
Yeah. Matthew, are both Democratic House members going to run for the Senate? One's already in. Pappas is already in. Is Goodlander going to run as well?
Unclear. Again, I'm a Republican. I would say no way. She's not from New Hampshire. She just got there. She just got to Congress 3 months ago. But guess what? This is disruptive times. Ambition can be rewarded, can also be deadly. I saw both of them speak, and wow, they are running a very populist message. Chris Pappas, who's always been I'm a bipartisan, would consistently win in a Republican-leaning district, was now talking about fighting, and the crowd went wild for fight. And then Maggie Goodlander, interestingly enough, talked about how tariffs can be a great tool, but they're not being used well in this case, opened up her business breakfast. And then again, there were protests over the weekend. She created a video, looks like a Senate commercial talking about fighting for freedom and just, being out there with the people. I would not be shocked if we have the King Kong Godzilla primary.
Who would you make the favorite in that primary?
Oof, I would say probably Congressman Chris Pappas. But, last go around, former executive counselor Colin Van Ostern was the favorite, and she whipped his ass.
I think she'd win. I think she'd win.
Wow.
Wait, when you say she, you mean Maggie?
Yeah,
Mark?
I think she'd win the primary.
Correct.
Wow.
Unclear.
I think she'd win the primary.
I'm being honest.
I'm so impressed with how, I don't mean this in a pejorative way. I'm so impressed with how ruthless she was as a candidate. And I think she would do damage to Pappas in the primary, I think.
Being a woman running in New Hampshire, maybe unlike other places, is quite an asset.
Yeah, all you do is elect women to statewide office. Sean or Dan, either of you want to ask Matthew anything or weigh in on this New Hampshire stuff?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Matthew, thank you.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Matthew, knowing that Caroline is not eligible, nor, she said to me she has no intention of seeking office. Outside of Scott Brown, is there another candidate that could actually win a primary and be competitive?
Unclear. This is New Hampshire. You know, nobody knew of Maggie Goodlander before she ran, and now we're talking about her being the favorite for a Senate seat. She's been here for 3 months. We do appreciate outsiders, but the short answer is no.
Yeah.
Not right
and,
now.
and there might be
And
two
just-
open house seats too.
Correct.
Does Corey Lewandowski run?
I do not believe so. Not at all.
don't
And I
think he
guess
will.
my question would be, could Maggie Goodlander, Chris is in, right? Chris Pappas is in. Could Maggie Goodlander do an exploratory run for US Senate
Yeah.
and then get to the filing and then say never mind and maintain her House seat? I would just
Yes.
be shocked. I would be
What's
shocked.
what's the deadline to decide? Do you know?
June of next year.
Yeah, I was going
Right.
to say the
'Cause
primary
it's a
is late.
September primary. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd
all
watch
right, we'll
Kirsten
see.
Gillibrand, the DSCC,
Yeah.
on that. Yeah.
But we have
It's-
Pritzker coming later on this month. I think
Yeah.
you're going to see, again, the big dogs coming in, probably on both sides. I would not be shocked to see Vance coming soon, other surrogates on the Republican side. This race will be competitive, although it's, it probably advantage D. But again, you're going to see a lot of the big dogs coming through on both sides.
Any chance there's like Sununu grandchildren that might be interested?
Listen, there's a whole clan. There's Pete Sununu. Who knows what happens. But
I wonder if JD Vance tries to find like rich, young kind of MAGA, in his image, in the Don Jr. image, to see if they can deliver it.
Well, the best Republican governor of New Hampshire was a Democrat. What was that guy's name? That businessman who was governor?
John Lynch.
John Lynch. So I bet you there's some billionaire who's moved up from Massachusetts who nobody's even thinking of who could end up running for one of these 3 seats.
Sure.
And maybe JD Vance finds them. Matthew, thank you. As always, grateful to you. Marianne Nicholas, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are after you unmute and tell us what's on you're already unmuted. Tell us what's on your mind. And thank you for joining.
I'm from Montana, finally getting some spring. I'm really cautious about the tariffs. I'm a Thomas Sowell fan. He's cautious. That makes me cautious. I'm a lifelong Republican, but I'm frustrated a little bit with the conversation not being more about wages. We can bring manufacturing jobs back, but if they pay $11 an hour, as opposed to the service jobs like Costco that are paying $30 with benefits, I just don't know if the workers in America are going to be advantaged by this at all. I think that tax is going to be on those lower earning folks. And I don't see any message from the Republicans, and I don't anticipate that they would focus more on worker issues. This sounds like I'm on your team, Dan, and I might be. Instead of, we've focused on shareholder value and executive pay, and it has skewed so much of wealth accumulation in this country. And I think there should be a way to make it, I don't like that word fair, but I don't see some of this policy solving some of the problems that created this movement. So I'm just curious what maybe Sean or Dan would have solution-wise from the Republican side, or if the Democrats are going to have some solutions that really focus on shareholder. I have a friend that's been in AI for 30 years. He just lost his job, his company. They're all hiring Indian folks from India that will work more cheaply. So I don't know, it's not just manufacturing. So I'm concerned about just wages. I live in a little town, we're a low income area, and it's depressed here. Agriculture's our primary economic driver, but that's not a huge employer.
Marianne, thank you for that. You speak for tens of millions as we watch the market surging back up today pretty significantly so far. Dan.
Good, because
I
would like to retire eventually.
Understood. Dan and then Sean respond to what Marianne so articulately said.
Yeah, well said, Marianne. It's a great point. I know there have been some Democrats who have talked about the lack of support for raising minimum wage further beyond 15 and things like that, and said, how can you call for all this reshoring if, to your point, some of this is on the significantly lower end potentially? Look, the lack of wage growth has been an issue now for 30 years. Actually, Trump deserves some credit that in his first term, he did help to lift wages for working class people. He did. I don't believe the tariffs will do this right now. And I keep going back to, it takes years to find a place to build a factory, to get all the materials, to build it, to then find the right workers, train them, and get it up and running to produce the widget. And so I just don't see how Trump is going to be able to accomplish this without putting up serious tariffs that are in place for many years to create it. And I don't have a good answer on the lack of wage growth. It's bedeviled both parties.
So all I would say, Marianne, is, and I appreciate your question and what's going on, but I continue to be troubled by the lack of seriousness of what's going on in Washington. I think what Donald Trump is trying to do is standing up. As I said, I am a big fan of market access and reciprocity, which is what he's been championing for a long time. It is ridiculous that we have this disparity between what we face going into a market and not another. But the idea that one policy is somehow a panacea for all of the other issues is just not right. I mean, Dan's right. I mean, I believe that we need to invest in tax credits and other things that will get companies to want to be here, to want to stay here, to develop a labor force. I think there's a discussion that we have to have on H-1B visas so that we're not just importing people, that we're actually getting a commitment to grow the next generation of Americans that can do those jobs. The simple answer shouldn't always default to, let's just bring in more people from other countries. I'm sympathetic to the argument of, I'd rather have you, as President Trump says, staple a card to your diploma so that you stay here and grow in the United States. But I also think that we should be creating policies that encourage STEM, that encourage development here in the United States of companies to build here, to stay here, and to look to the next generation. We are not prepared for the coming fight that China is bringing our way. Full stop. That is not our debt is out of whack. Our tax policies out of whack, and our manufacturing's out of whack. The idea that so many politicians can sit there and do ad after ad and talk about the threat of China and do absolutely nothing about it, to me, is remarkable. The idea that you can go home and look yourself in the face in the mirror with knowing that you are letting this country down, because that's what we are doing. As I've said before, the former CNO used to have a clock in her office that counted down to 2027. That is real. Right? The idea that we face this threat from them and we're doing nothing to prepare from it is literally disgusting on a bipartisan basis, that these guys are not doing what to prepare us militarily or economically.
I will say the CHIPS Act is a step in the right direction. It is high-tech manufacturing of chips used in AI that somebody's party is thinking of trying to dismantle because Joe Biden's name's on it.
I will say, I think the intent was there. I'm not sure that the policy matches the intent.
Marianne, thank you. Very grateful to you for being part of this.
Thanks
for coming on. Thank you. Okay. All right. Jack, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what's on your mind.
Yes, I'm from San Antonio. In fact, I'm looking out the window at the trash left over from the Final Four. But I really enjoyed that.
Jack, I just want to interrupt you 1 second. Can we switch to Fox, please? Kevin Hassett's on. Let's see what he's saying. Jack, I appreciate your patience. Jack, while we wait, why don't you get started?
Well, I really enjoyed that earlier clip on option B, the advantage that China has, because I think that was right on the point.
Great deals, and
right,
that's
sorry,
what he's
Jeff,
doing
stand
right now
by.
for the American people.
But to be clear, on trade deficits versus trade barriers, where do you come down?
Well, there are some countries that we have trade surplus with now because they don't buy much of our stuff, but we have raw materials we need from them and so on. So I think in the end, the point is for the big trading partners that have been giving us massive trade deficits for years, even decades, because of their unfair trade policies, that's what we're focused like a laser beam on.
All right. So I guess more to come on that because it's not exactly clear. Wall Street does affect at some point Main Street. And this from Bloomberg today, that there are a historic high number of people who are cashing in their 401ks right now. And that means that that also comes with a penalty. Empower sees hardship withdrawals running 15% to 20% above the historic norm. So that's not good timing for them in the last few days anyway. Does that give you concern about the bigger picture of an economic slowdown when what we need is economic growth?
Well, first of all, I'd have to look at the base of those numbers, because a 15 or 20% increase off of a really low number would be less concerning. The fact is that markets move up, markets move down, and one of the things that we've seen historically in terms of behavioral economics is that people tend to get anxious when there's a downturn and then sell and then miss when it comes back up. And because of that, the people who try to time the stock market tend to accrue far less wealth than the people who just put their money in and hold it.
Right.
And I'm a buy and hold person. The stuff I've been buying for my whole life, I've been holding for my whole life, and I think that's the best strategy for investors.
I hear you on that, and unfortunately I'm in a similar position, but a lot of people aren't. Let me ask you this: are you counting on the Fed
That's pretty aggressive
to lower
pushback by
interest rates
Fox
in order to get to your numbers to pencil out for economic growth?
The Fed, we respect the independence of the Fed. The Fed will decide what it wants to do on interest rates. I'm sorry, Dana, I don't comment on the Fed's interest rate policy.
I respect
His boss
not commenting on the Fed. I used to have to do that dance myself. My last question for you is this.
I wasn't dancing.
The president spoke to Japan yesterday, spoke to South Korea today. That sounds like it was positive, the market reacting that way. But China is the big monster in the room. And do you expect either a call there, or do you think China will go forward today and add more to its tariff policy against the United States?
The instructions from the president for all of us have been very clear that we're to prioritize our allies and our trading partners right now as we move forward with the trade deals. And so the president will decide when and if to talk with China, but right now we've received the instruction to prioritize our allies and our trading partners like Japan and Korea and others.
And so that nobody thinks that the police are coming to get you.
Okay. Before we go back to Jack, Dan, Sean, any thoughts on what Kevin Hassett said?
I mean, no, I think they're trying to get all on the same page today, and I think you're going to hear that message over and over again. But I continue to believe that both Kevin and Scott are the strongest calming voices that they have.
Yeah.
And to Dan's point, look, the one thing about Dana, as you know, I mean, she's a former press secretary. She gets this stuff. She understands what you can and can't say, and all the market reaction. So I do think that you're not going to get, she's not there to play patty cake. She's there to get answers.
Well, and I don't think it's an accident that the New York Post editorial was pretty aggressive today. You're seeing some pushback on Fox, and I'll just go to what he just said. You are not pushing anymore for manufacturing being reshoring. If what you're looking to do is he's talking about market access in Europe and in South, that is not reshoring. That is so that we can sell cars in Europe, we can sell beef in Australia, beef in Japan, which is great. It's great for Americans to have access. You are strengthening the free trade system under that, in that construct, where more people will seek the lowest, the cheapest production that's good quality than reshoring. And I'm going to be very curious what the Steve Bannons and Lighthizer and Navarro say, because they are losing. And you can only do this once. They can't come back at it in a year and say, now we're serious.
Well, you can come back to trying to convince companies to move their manufacturing to the U.S. through other means.
You know what, Mark? I don't really think you can, because you're going to have the midterms coming up, and where they may lose the House, people are going to start looking. I mean, to Sean's point, he had one shot. He even said it himself. You cave like this and move on to this, you've shifted the goalpost. It's tough.
All right, Mr. Desmond, thank you for your patience. The floor is yours again.
I really did like that option B. Not that I like it, but I think that's more the reality, because China has that advantage where they don't lurch back and forth between the extremes that we have been stuck with. Really, we went from Bush going into out of his election with the 2008, then into Obama and his excesses, then that swung to Trump, and then Trump's problems led to Biden, and of course here we are back again to Trump. And it's so difficult to maintain the consistency, I think, that the markets want in the face of that kind of movement. And and we're really, I think that's going to be very, very difficult over time. The fact that we're doing as well as we are, I think, speaks to the basic resilience of America. But that's problematic.
Dan.
Well, one, I'm thankful that we're in a democracy, so we get the option to choose our leaders. Look, I go back to when Donald Trump ran in 2015. One of the big things he railed against was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And what was the Trans-Pacific Partnership about? Surrounding China with a kind of pro-US free trade system to bring them into our, to tie ourselves economically, to not align with China and allow China to take over the region. And we threw it away.
Well,
and now,
just to be clear, as somebody who actually worked on that, TPP was very flawed in how it did the lowest common denominator of so it was a great deal for them. It wasn't a great deal for us.
Well, you didn't propose anything to try to fix it. All we've done, and this is where railing on NATO, railing on all these other countries, the challenge is, can we, again, I hope Trump is successful, but can we get them to come and deal with us, to see us as friends? What will we do for them to incentivize them to want to work with us? Because China is trying to take over the region, and that will make it harder for us to break them.
True.
And that's, I think, where it ties into the tariff issue, because we're doing nothing right now than making enemies instead of having anything that's reasonably targeted, where it's so expansive, these very allies that we would want to help us in a more nuanced approach, and whether it be Europe or the Pacific, it's very difficult to bring them on board.
Agreed.
Jack, thank you. Grateful to you for coming in. Much appreciated. Everybody is watching the markets again, still up. Assumption that there'll be more announcements today of conversations, and China will be in a different place. Sean, and obviously we've got starting in moments, we've got the U.S. Trade Representative on the Hill. Sean, what else are you looking for today on tariffs?
I mean, I think that testimony that Jamieson Greer is going to give will be interesting to see. Again, my big thing is, can they get back to a single message? Can everybody start singing off the same song sheet? Whether it's Jamieson, Hassett, I think Kevin and Scott are there. I think that it's does everybody do that to get? I mean, the biggest issue is, we've talked about this over and over again. Even people who are supporting Trump are saying, just tell us what the goal is here, and getting everybody back to the same focus is critical right now. And then can we see some deals happen?
Dan.
I'm just really curious what these deals look like that allow them to save face. That is what I'm going to be very, very curious about. How do they sell victory?
And I'm curious to see how quickly the people who've become administration critics in finance and tech, how quickly they applaud. I think one of the undercovered asymmetries between the parties now is the right can have these big intra-family feuds and then make up and move right on.
But Mark, the thing is, I mean, this goes back to the comment I made. Even if you
we'll see if it happens on this one, but it's been happening. Sorry, go ahead.
I believe that the X factor is the non-tariff barriers, right? I mean, those are all the things from, allowing GMOs to emission standards to tech I mean, like, there's all these things. But even if you just took the tariff barrier itself down from 25 or 50 to 0, and the market rebounds, 3 days later to higher than when it was, the argument to say, okay, well, what Trump did was 4 days of market disruption to take a tariff barrier from 38 or 50% or whatever to 0. I still go, are you kidding me? That's still on its face a huge win for America. And for all of the whining, the bedwetting, it seems to me that is, I hoped that some of these same people who freaked out do come back and say, okay, I may not have agreed with the tactics, but he got it. This is similar to NATO. No one liked how he treated our allies, but they all anteed up when it came to their own agreements on the percentage of GDP that they would deal with respect to their own national defense. So I just think that we forget that, for 48 hours or 72 hours, you had to deal with some market disruption, but at the end of the day, you got a good deal.
Right. But again, the question is, can he go to this well ever again in 4 years or not? Because
And I think the question is too, like, let's say in Europe, let's say they say, we'll let your autos in, but not your ag. And then Trump says, victory, Detroit, I got it for you.
right.
Then what does the ag community say? And I think this is I can't see everybody going. They all have domestic constituencies and everything. How do they declare and sell victory? That's what I'm really curious about.
We'll close on the notion of whether the Republicans can stay united around this by my reading you 2 tweets from Elon Musk that he just did a few minutes ago. We're in reaction to Peter Navarro quotes about Musk. Navarro is truly a moron. What he says here is demonstrably false. Tesla has the most American-made cars. Navarro is dumber than a sack of bricks.
That's a great note to end on.
By the way, they do work pretty much down the hall from each other.
They do, and they both like to dine in the White House mess and hang out in the Oval, so we'll see how that goes. They're both lovely men. Thank you all for watching. Sean, what do you have tonight?
Actually, it's interesting. Tonight, we've got this big debate. Keith Self, congressman from Texas, introduced this act, the SNAP Act, that says you can't use federal dollars to pay for big soda. So we're going to hear from him on it. And then I'm bringing on the CEO of the American Beverage Association, Kevin Keene, to respond to him. So I'm actually, this is Maha on steroids, baby.
I love it.
All right, awesome. Two ways today. First, 4 o'clock Eastern time, the Moynihan Report. Michael Moynihan's guest is Olivia Reingold, a staff writer for the Free Press, talking about the cult of Luigi Mangione. So that's 4 p.m. Eastern time, sponsored by our friends at Fire. Again, I urge you to sample Michael's show. If you have not yet, he is a unique talent. It's a great show, 4 p.m. today. And then 6 o'clock, I'll be on with a regular edition of Two Way Tonight, but irregularly awesome, because my guests will include Selena Zito and Beverly Hallberg, 2 fantastic folks. So join us tonight, and we'll have all full coverage of the day's events and tariffs and elsewhere. And the 3 of us will be back in 23 hours, really 22 hours and 59 minutes, because we run over, with another edition of this program. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.